All right, great. Well, first of all, apologies for the hectic start. Thanks for joining me today for Lifehacks Dba Tools edition. This is me. My name is Jess Pomfret. My pronouns are she and her. I am a database engineer and an open source contributor. Let's make that smaller. I have contributed to Dba Tools, dbHX, and I have written some DSC resources for the SQL Server DSC module. I'm passionate about automation, proper football, and fitness. The most important thing on this slide is my email address and my Twitter handle. If you have any questions during the session or after the session, please feel free to reach out to me. I love to talk about this stuff, and my wife will tell you I spend far too much time on Twitter. So do get in contact with me there. So the agenda for today, what are we going to talk about? First of all, we're going to talk about what is Dba Tools. Hopefully most of you have already heard about it, but I will give us a quick overview and we'll talk about what that is. We'll then do a quick PowerShell 101, just basically how we'll get the module, how we'll get set up, that kind of stuff. And then we'll go through some life hacks. Now, when I say life hacks, I'm thinking about things that we can just take with us and implement immediately. I'm looking for things that you can use Dba Tools for on Monday at your jobs. These are 6 things that I think can be immediately useful. So we're going to talk about testing our backups, which for any database administrator, that's got to be one of the top priorities. Managing logins and access, we'll look at masking sensitive data, migrating things, meeting best practices, and I've saved the best for last, who doesn't love documentation? So we'll finish on that. So we'll dive straight into it. What is Dba Tools? So Dba Tools is an open source PowerShell module. It was written by, or it was started by Chrissy Lemaire, and since then it has grown in leaps and bounds. There are hundreds of contributors and hundreds of commands that we'll talk about in a while. It's basically like a command line management studio. So everything you can do in Management Studio, you do for one thing, right? You connect to one server and you look at some databases on that one server. You can add logins. You can set up the permissions for that one login. Dba Tools is basically Management Studio, but on the command line, which makes it perfect for handling multiples. We can handle multiple servers, multiple databases all at once, and either get information about them or even set stuff about them without having to click through multiple GUI windows. It is MIT licensed, which is worth mentioning here, which is a pretty permissive license. You can basically use it for whatever you need. So you can use it for private use, you can modify it, you can distribute it, whatever you need is covered under that license. The module is hosted on GitHub, and you can get more information about the license up there on GitHub also. Finally, the last thing I want to mention on this slide is that it's secure. Whenever we're talking about bringing code into our organization or into our enterprise, we want to make sure it's enterprise ready, right? And the PowerShell team at Microsoft have worked really hard at this secure by design approach. Dba Tools is a PowerShell module, so it's building on top of the security that PowerShell already has built in. For the Dba Tools module, there are a few things that we do to make sure it's as secure as possible. First of all, it's signed, which means that when the code is pushed to the PowerShell gallery, and we'll talk about that in a second, how we get the module from the PowerShell gallery, but when that module is encapsulated from GitHub and a release is made, it is signed with a certificate and put onto the gallery. So when you download that module, if the certificate is intact, it means that you're getting the code that they put there. It hasn't been tampered with. It's the exact code that was expected when the Dba Tools team released it. Also, there are Pester Tests. There are a bunch of Pester Tests that make sure that the functionality within Dba Tools remains consistent and the same. So I mentioned earlier, there are hundreds of contributors. If I make a contribution that breaks something for someone else, that's no good, right? We need to be kind of reliable and stable. And so these Pester Tests make sure that anything I add doesn't break anyone else's code. There are also branch policies. So as I mentioned, it's hosted up on GitHub, and these branch policies mean that only certain people can merge into into the development branch and then into the master branch, which is what's published to the PowerShell gallery. So there are about 3 or 4 maintainers for Dba Tools, and I was just made a maintainer last week, which I'm really excited about. But that means that I can merge into the development branch. So if you contribute some code, you put in a pull request to add a new function or to fix a bug, I can go in there, review that code, make sure the Pester tests are running successfully, and merge that into development. Once we get a few things into the development branch, Chrissy will come in and she'll make sure everything looks good, and she'll publish to master and then release to the PowerShell gallery. So these branch policies restrict what has to happen for code to be accepted into that branch. So passing tests, a review from a maintainer, and then also restricts who can actually merge into the final version of Dba Tools before it's published. All of these things together make sure that we have a secure module that we can rely on, right? I use this at work in my corporate infrastructure, and I want to make sure that when I get a new version from the PowerShell gallery that I can trust it and nothing is broken that I need. So that is Dba Tools. As I was mentioned, it was created by Chrissy Lemaire, and it was originally created to migrate SharePoint instances. If you've ever looked at a SQL server behind a SharePoint instance, there are hundreds of databases, it feels like, hundreds of logins, there are linked servers, there are jobs, there are all these things. And when you migrate that to a new version, you need to take all of those pieces with you. So Chrissy wrote this really long script that went through everything, every different section, moving it from one server to another. And someone eventually was talking to her about it, and they were like, oh, you should make that a module. That will be really useful for everyone else. And that's what she did in 2015. The first commit to GitHub was this massive script kind of formed into a module. It then took 4 years for it to get to 1.0. We launched that at Data Grill back in June 2019. And the reason is that Chrissy wanted to have a really high quality module. Every function has standardized naming and standardized parameters. So as I start to use Dba Tools, I know what the parameters are going to be. I know that if I'm going to connect to a SQL server, I'm going to use the SQL instance parameter. And it's named the same on every function, which makes it really easy to use. She was also really keen on getting integration tests and unit tests for all of the functions. As I mentioned, those Pester tests are going to make sure that our code is good, that our functionality is working and as expected. The other thing was the comment-based help, and I'll show you that in the demos, but every function has a really good comment-based help. So you can use Get Help in PowerShell to pull up description, information about the parameters, and examples for every function, meaning that it's easy to use and easy to basically investigate and learn what you need. At the 1.0 launch, there was over 160 contributors and 550 commands. So that kind of gives you an idea of the breadth of this module. The last thing to mention on this slide is there is a book currently being written called Learn Dba Tools in a Month of Lunches. If you've ever used the PowerShell, Learn PowerShell in a Month of Lunches, this is the same idea. Basically 30, I think it's 30 chapters or 27 chapters. Each one is something you can kind of digest on your lunch break, and it takes you through Dba Tools, how to get set up, all the way through to pretty complicated examples. It's currently in a MEEP, which is the Manning Early Access Program. So you can go ahead and go to dbatools.io/MEEP, and I'll share these links at the end. 12 out of 27 chapters are already available. You can download the book and get updates as more chapters are released. Hopefully you weren't looking for a whole hour of slides, because that is pretty much the end of my slides here. And we're going to dive into the demos. So let's pop over here. Going to make this a little bigger. All right. Cool. Hopefully this is reasonably easy to read. Please feel free to shout out Gianluca if it's a little small still. I can make it a little bigger. So the first thing we're going to talk about, is it okay?
It is okay.
Cool. And feel free if there are any questions. Feel free to interrupt me. We'll stop at the end of each one of these life hacks and kind of pick up any questions. But if they're pressing, feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so getting started with Dba Tools. The first thing we want to do is get the module, right? We'll look at how we get the module, where it's available from, how we can find what commands are available for us, and then the command-based help that I talked about. Then we're going to touch on splatting, which is just a way of formatting my code. So as I mentioned, the module is available from the PowerShell gallery, and because of that, you can use install-module Dba Tools to pull down the latest version and install it on your local machine. Now, obviously, you need an internet connection for that. If you want to put it in your environment where you don't have an internet connection, you can instead use save-module Dba Tools and save that down to a folder that you can then copy out to, say, your jump box or something if it doesn't have internet connection. If you use install-module to install the module, you can then use update-module to update it. As I mentioned, there are releases coming out all the time, and so it's really handy to have this way of updating your module and keeping yourself up to date. So I've already downloaded the module and got it ready to go, and what I can do then is use import-module to import it into my PowerShell session. If I take a look at get-module Dba Tools, you can see it's whirring away. I've got version 10139 available. That is the latest version as of last week. Possibly there's been another one since then, but this is the one we're going to use for the demos. I can also take a look at get-module with the list available parameter, and what that will do is it will list all of the versions I have available on my local machine. Just thinking about it. I can tell you that I have a bunch on there. I have not cleaned them up in a while, and there you can see I've got versions all the way back from 112, which is quite a while ago now. These are just folders that are in my module path. I can go in there and I can clean them up, and I usually do that on my work machine. I keep like the last 3 modules that I have. So as I mentioned with PowerShell, it loves to teach you, and this is one of the reasons I love PowerShell, because learning just a couple of commands can get you to the point where you can use any module basically. So the first one we want to talk about is get-command. Now here I'm going to pass in the module PowerShell, and I'm the module Dba Tools, and I'm going to say get all of the commands from the Dba Tools module. And you can see that they are flying by. There are, what did I say, 590 different commands in Dba Tools. Let me just close this. And all of these are available with the module that I've imported into my session. So there's a load there. That's not very easy to read. But with get-command, you can use a pattern to find more specific commands that you want to find. So I'm going to pass in the keyword compression, and this is basically going to find me any commands that have compression in the title. And you can see I've got 3. I've got get, set, and test Dba Db compression. So get-command is built into PowerShell. You can use that even if you don't have Dba Tools installed to find commands that you have available to you. There's a bonus for finding commands within Dba Tools. The Dba Tools team has written find Dba command, and if I pass in the same keyword of compression, you'll see that I actually get more results. The reason is that find Dba command is searching through all of the comment-based help for the word compression, whereas get-command just looks for in the title of the function. So if it's going to return, nope. This is going to be one of those days where code is playing with me. Okay, so you can see that I got a few more results, right? I still got the get Dba compression, but I also got backup Dba database, which is weird, right? That doesn't seem to mention compression. The reason is that there's a switch on backup Dba database to apply backup compression. So that matches the compression keyword and it's returned this for me. This is really powerful for finding things where you're not exactly sure what the name's going to be, right? Maybe it's user, maybe it's login, maybe it's database, but you can pass in different things and find what you need. There are some other parameters on find Dba command, such as author. So if I pass in my name as author, you can see all of the commands that I started. Now, I'm not saying that I wrote these, I'm saying I started them. Backup Dba Db certificate is one of the first commands that I contributed to Dba Tools, and that command looks nothing like what it did when I submitted it first. The reason is that someone else has come along and taken my basic functionality that I needed and added on extra use cases, right? That command does way more than I've ever needed to do for backing up certificates. Which is just the point I want to make here is that by sharing my code that I wrote, someone else has added onto it, and now we both have a better function than either of us started with, right? So this is really cool. This is one of the reasons I love Dba Tools so much, is that my code that I use can be contributed and then improved on by other people who maybe understand certificates better than I do, or write better code, or write better Pester tests. So this whole community aspect of us creating this better code together. The second command that is PowerShell level is get-help. And this is the one that's really powerful. So get-help and then pass in any function name. So I'm passing in test Dba Db compression, and you get all of the help that's within the function. So here you see a bit of a synopsis. You've got a description here. This is particularly using code from the Tiger team, so there's a link for more reading. And there are a bunch of other things you can do if you want examples or detailed help. My favorite one is to use the show window parameter. And what that does is it pops up a window, usually on the other monitor, which is completely separate to my console. So I can leave this open while I'm writing my code, but then I can search in here too. If I wanted to find the database stuff, and then do next, you can see that it highlights that words within this help. It's searchable and easy to see. If you scroll all the way down, you can also see there are a bunch of examples written in. As I mentioned, every Dba Tools command has examples inside the help. So you can grab these and see exactly how you can run it, just with a SQL instance or with a database name. Down here, I've got some exclude database options, plenty of ways of using this command. So that's get-help with the show window parameter. All right, the last thing I want to mention on this in this intro section is splatting. So splatting is just a way of formatting my code to make it more readable. On line 49, I have get Dba Db compression, passing in an instance, a credential, a database, and then I'm selecting some things, and oh, it's gone off the screen. It's not, and this isn't a particularly long function either. If I did a where clause and I did some other stuff, it's going to get even further off the screen. So with splatting, we basically create this hash table, and I've named it splat get. And you pass in the keys are the parameter names, and then the values are what you'll pass into that parameter. So you can see this is the exact same code as above, but in an easier to read format. And then when you use the hash table in the command, you use the @ symbol. So running this, I'm going to get the exact same results. I'm getting the first 5 objects from get Dba Db compression from my AdventureWorks database. The reason I'm showing you this is all of my code today is formatted using splatting, so I just wanted to make that clear so you can understand how to write code that's a little clearer, and it works better in demos with the font a little bigger. So that is the introduction. Do we have any questions at this point, or should we move on to testing our backups?
No questions so far.
All right, perfect. So this is really my first life hack, and this is one of the best things that you can take away from this session. We're going to take a look at our current backup history. We'll back up some databases, and then we'll test our backups. This has got to be one of the first things you think about when you're a database administrator, right? Do I have good backups? And really the only way to know if my backup is good is if I've actually tried to restore from it. So Dba Tools makes that really simple, and we'll walk through that right here. So first things first, we're going to take a look at get Dba Db Backup History. So I'm going to run this again with splatting. I'm just passing the MS SQL 1 SQL instance, and I'm just ordering it by start. So you can see this is all of the backup history for my instance. These are running in Docker containers on my laptop, and I just fired them up before this session and ran a few backups. So you can see AdventureWorks 2017. I've got a full backup, a differential backup, and a log backup. There are plenty of parameters that you can pass in to filter this down. I recommend using that get-help and exploring that command. There's a lot to offer, but for today, that is my current backup history for AdventureWorks. I know that there's a database admin database on that instance too, and I can back that up from Dba Tools using backup Dba database. So now I'm just passing in a SQL instance and a database name, and this is going to go and run off and by default run a full backup to the default backup location for my SQL instance. Here you can see the results have been returned, just that it was a full backup, how big it was, when it started, when it ended. You'll start to see that the output return from these Dba Tools functions is very similar, right? I've got my SQL instance, my database. I have my SQL instance, my database. This is the standardization I was talking about earlier. Everything's going to sort to have a kind of common feel as you work through this. Okay, so backup Dba database is taking an ad hoc backup, right? what's really important is being able to test that last backup that I took. And we have test DBA last backup for this. Now this command, just this few lines of code, is going to take the backups that I already have. So the last backups I have for my AdventureWorks and database admin backup from MS SQL 1. That is my source production SQL server, let's say. And then I can have this destination parameter. So MS SQL 2 is just another server I have running on my laptop. That's where the test restore is going to happen. I don't really want to test restore right next to my production database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the last backups from my production databases on MS SQL 1 and restore them over to MS SQL 2. One thing to mention here, I'm using out variable and I'm passing it into the results variable. And what that's going to do is put my results from this run into that variable for use later on. So let's kick this off and see what it does. We should get a pop-up in a second, but I've turned on the verbose switch here on line 31, basically just because I'm nosy. I like to know what's going on. If you don't run that, you won't get this beautiful yellow text. But what this is doing is it's building the LSN chain from the backups that were taken on MS SQL 1. It's not taking new backups, it's testing the ones we already have. It found where they were on the disk and it's built a chain. So for AdventureWorks, you can see I've got backup 2 of 3 is being restored. That is going to restore the full backup, differential backup, and the latest log backup. So basically getting us to the latest point in time and making sure we can get to that point. Once that is restored to my MS SQL 2 instance, it'll run dbcc check db against that database and make sure there's no corruption. Once that's complete, it will record the results into that results variable and then drop the database to clean it up before moving on to the next one. So you can see the output that's just come back is for the database admin backup. Oh, it's not letting me put it all on one screen, but you can see the source server, where we restored it to, the database, and then some information about it. So restore result was success, dbcc result was success, and then I have some information about how long the restore took, how long the dbcc took, the dates of the backup files that we used, and the actual backup file. So in this case, we only used a back file because there was just one full backup for that one. But if I scroll back up to look at AdventureWorks, you can see we had my full backup, my differential backup, and my transaction log backup. Now this is pretty useful information, right? If I'm doing this every week and I'm picking a few databases, it would be really useful to keep track of this somewhere. So what I can do is I can take the results variable, which contains just this information we've already looked at from the previous run, and I can pipe it to write Dba data table. Now what that does is it takes any PowerShell object and puts it in a database table. You can use this for so many things. I use write Dba data table all the time for getting a PowerShell object and just dumping it into a database for use later on. So the parameters for this are a SQL instance, database where I want to store the data, and then a name of the table. If I use the auto create table switch, if that table doesn't exist, it's going to create it on the fly. So let's go ahead and run that. One thing to mention, Dba Tools will do its best to find suitable data types for your database, for your table, but it's not going to be perfect. It's pretty good at numbers and stuff. If you put a string in there, it's going varchar max all the way. So it's worth designing the table if you're going to use it for production. Let's zoom this in a bit. All right, so I'm in Azure Data Studio here, and I am connected to my MS SQL 1 instance. If I take a look at my database admin database and my test restore table, which is the table we just selected to dump these results to, you can see I've got 2 results returned. It has all of the information you saw in the PowerShell because I just took that object and I just smushed it into a table. I got database, I got server, where it came from, where it was restored, the file size, the results were all successful. The more important thing that I like here is that it has the amount of time it took to restore. So how many times has someone come to your desk and be like, oh, I dropped a table and I'm going to need a restore. How long is that going to take? Well, I can come here and I can say, all right, well, the last time I did a test restore was on this date and it took me 22 seconds to get it back. So this data is really valuable, not just to say my backups are good, but to give you more information that you can give to your customers on how long it's going to take to restore what they need. If we pop back to code real quick, we can also do something like this. So test DBA last backup, and I'm going to kick this off while we're talking about it. I'm using the same Splat So I'm testing the same backups at this point since I haven't taken any new backups. But what this does is it's using piping, and this is a really powerful thing in PowerShell. So test DBA last backup. This is the parameters to do the test that we already set earlier on. This is the pipe, and what that does is it takes the object and it just passes it along the pipeline to the next command. So here I'm going to write DBA data table. So what this is doing is testing my backups, and as it gets that data, it passes it along the pipeline and writes it straight to the database table. So this is basically one line of code. Okay, a few extra because I use splatting to lay it out nicely. But this is one line of code to test my backups and store the data. This is pretty simple to set up, right? You could take this back on Monday and get a server where you can test backups and pull this information and set this up really easily. And as this is finishing up, it's just doing the DBCC checks on my restored database. And once this finishes up, that data is all going to be in my database. And if I run this weekly or perhaps even daily for certain backups, I'm going to start to get a history, right? And you can use this data over time to trend whether your backups are getting bigger, how are they taking longer, and now they're going to take longer than the SLA that we have to restore them if we needed to. This is all really valuable information. And you can see AdventureWorks, it took 22 seconds the first time and a little bit faster the second time, only 18 seconds. Obviously, these databases are really small, right? But if you had bigger ones, this is really valuable. Cool. So that is testing our backups. Any questions on backups, or are we ready to move on to logins?
No questions.
Cool. It must be super clear or super boring. That's all right. Just going to restart my session. Super clear. All right, we'll go with that. Cool. All right, so managing logins and access. This is something that we all have to do as database administrators, and it's not one of my favorite things to do. So I'm going to talk through how we can easily add a login to the server, add a database, add a user to the database, and then assign permissions to that user. We'll look at how we can change passwords for SQL logins, and then I'm going to show you the real power, right? This is still just one thing at a time, which I can do in Management Studio just as easy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read in a bunch of users from a CSV and create all of the permissions with just a few lines of code. So first things first, we have new DBA login. And this is going to create either a SQL login. In this example, I'm creating a SQL login, but it could just as easily create a Windows, an AD account or an AD group name. And for this one, I'm passing in a very secure password, which actually I may have just got rid of because, oh no, it's still there. Cool. So new DBA login, passing in the SQL instance, the login name, and the secure password. That's going to create my login on the server, right? At this point, there's a login there, but it's got no database access. It's just a member of public, not really any use. So that was new DBA login. So that was server level. Now we're going to do new DBA DB user. And what that's going to do is basically the same thing, but I'm going to add the user to the database, right? So now I've basically checked the checkbox next to the database in Management Studio, but I haven't given myself any rights. So now my login exists in the database, my user exists in the database, but I still don't have any access to anything. So that was new DBA DB user. Then we're going to use add DBA DB role member to assign myself to a role. So my user is Jess P, my SQL instance, the database. This is the role, so DB data reader. And I could add more in here if I needed, DB reader and writer. Confirm false is basically just saying, I know what I'm doing, trust me. Don't pop up the prompt to say, are you sure? So when I run this, I've basically checked the checkbox next to the DB data reader in Management Studio, right? So now this user has access to read data from the database admin database, and they can go see the restore history that we built up earlier. There is also an add DBA server role member if you want to add them to sysadmin, DB creator, that level of roles. And as I mentioned, we can use set DBA login to change the password if we want. So right here, I'm using read host as a secure string. If I run this, we'll get a prompt down here asking for my new password, which I'll set super secure password. And it'll go out and change the password on the SQL server for the Jess P SQL login. This is really valuable because you can do all this via code, right? So at my previous job, we had a requirement to change SQL logins every year. So we wrote some code around this function to basically to get the new password, update the SQL login, and then insert it into the secret store. So this makes Dba Tools is great on its own, but it's extensible too, right? We can wrap extra code around it in PowerShell to be able to add on things that we personally need that maybe not everyone needs. So that is set DBA login. And you can see here, password change true. And again, this output looks familiar, right? We've got the SQL instance, we've got the login name. We know what to expect with Dba Tools whenever we get any output returned. Okay, so read in logins from a CSV. This is PowerShell 4 syntax. If you are PowerShell version 3 or lower, you can come down here and check this out. All we're going to do is import CSV. I've got a user's CSV down here. We'll take a quick look. It's just got user, password in clear text, not the smartest, server, database, and role. But you could do this from Active Directory too. If you weren't creating SQL logins, you wouldn't need that password. And all we're going to do is use the for each method to connect to the DBA instance, create the login, create the user, and add the role member. And as I run this, you'll see a bunch of outputs streaming past. But basically all it's doing is going through that spreadsheet and adding, or that CSV, and adding all of the things that we need to get those people access. And you can see that took 10 seconds. And if we come back over to Azure Data Studio and we take a look at our logins, you can see I've got Bob, Jane, and Jill. Those were added from the CSV. So that's a really easy example of using PowerShell and this idea of handling multiples, right, in one go. You could easily get new employees, their Active Directory information, the roles they need to be assigned, and have a job that runs every Monday to set your new employees up with access right off the bat, right? There's plenty of options for using this kind of syntax, pulling in a CSV of something and then doing a bunch of stuff based on it. So that's pretty cool. So that is handling logins. We will move along to data masking, unless there are any questions on logins.
No questions.
Cool, this is easy. All right, so masking sensitive data. Sander, who wrote these commands, has done a bunch of work on these recently and made them a lot faster and added a bunch of functionality. He's also working on a bunch of content that'll come out shortly, hopefully, that'll be really useful around these. So keep an eye out for that. He's done really great work on these masking commands. What I'm going to show you is how we can find potentially sensitive data in our database. We'll explore the randomizer. So he's built these commands on top of the bogus DLL, which is a DLL that creates test data, basically. And we'll talk about that again in a second. We'll then generate a masking config and then mask our data in our database with them. So let's go ahead and look at this Invoke Dba Pii Scan. So I'm going to run this against my employee table of AdventureWorks, right? Probably PII data in that database. And it is worth mentioning that although this is a good starting point, the best way of understanding the data in the table is to talk to someone who knows about it, right? You're going to want to go back to your application developers or your business analysts or whoever knows about this data and find out what's actually in there. But this is a really good way of getting a quick look at your data and seeing what's in there. So this is going to pop up a PowerShell window when it's done. A grid view, sorry, again on the other screen. And this might be a bit small for you to see. But what this does is it tells you exactly the data in here. And if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see that the database schema, table, and then the column name, right? So here it says that there's a national ID number and it thinks that it's a national ID number. And you can see down here too, there are some country options now, basically different patterns that would pick up a national ID number. And then credentials, personal gender, data, the row GUID, it's not very happy with GUIDs. It doesn't seem to do a good job of matching those, but this is a really great way of finding some potentially sensitive data and having a starting point within your database. So as I mentioned, it's built on top of this bogus DLL, and within that you can use getDBA randomized type to see the kind of data that you can generate. Okay, code wants to run my script. So these are the main types, or the type level. Within each of these, so address, database, phone, person, there are then subtypes. So we can again use get that DBA randomized type, looking at the person type, and we can see that these are the particular data points about a person that we can generate. So we can generate first names or full names or genders randomly as we go through. There are also, you can pass in a pattern, so particularly if you want credit cards or credit card numbers, or if you want to look for a certain type of name, there was file names, usernames, job names. All of this data is available to kind of spoof and create on the fly. And you can create data using get DBA randomized value. So this is just saying I need a random int, at least 10,000, and it created me an int right there. As we mentioned all those types, we can say, all right, I need a random first name with the locale of US, and it'll generate me a first name. Casimir? Cool. You can also create address types, right? So zip codes. In the US, if you create a zip code, and we'll run it twice there, you can see that it either comes back as a 5-digit zip code, or you can get a 5-digit zip code with a 4-digit extension. If I know I only ever want 5 digits, I can use a format mask and say, I only want 5 digits, or yep, the 5 digits. So it should always look like this when you return the data, and kind of control the data that is returned to match your data set. So this is fine for creating one-off bits of data, right? But what we really want to do is pass in a database and get that masked. So for this, we'll create new Dba Db masking config. I'm giving it the table of employee and some columns that I want to mask. And what this does is it goes, looks at the data, tries to work out what it is, and creates a JSON file, which should come down here when it's finished, of how it's going to mask that data. Cool. So this is the JSON file it created. It's this one. And basically all it does is it lays out the data that it's going to mask. So employee table, human resources schema, this is the column. So national ID number, it thinks it's going to generate a random int. Well, that's not really what we need, but we can change that in a minute. Login ID, it's worked out that it's an internet username that we're going to need. Job title, random string. It wasn't sure what that data is, but it's going to generate a random string, which is fine if you just want to obfuscate your data. But if you want specific data to test against, it's not the best. Birth date, it recognized it as a date in the past. So if I pull up this, excuse me, this form that I've already worked on, this JSON that I've already worked on, you can change this, right, to be exactly what you need. So here I'm saying, all right, I want a random string of numbers that is 9 characters long for my national ID number. For my login ID, I'm going to take an internet username. That's fine. For my birth date, I can control it. I want it to be between 1950 and 2000. And job title, I'm going to use the job title subtype. Once I've played with that config, you can use test Dba Db masking config to make sure that it is, oh, I've put the wrong name in here. I changed the name last night. Cool. So you can run this to just make sure that it's still valid JSON and no errors were returned. Just recently, the action column was added to the JSON. So when I ran this against an old version, it said this was the kind of results you got if it was not valid JSON. Okay, let's take a quick look at our data. Let's select my connection. Change it, fine. And I'm just grabbing a select top 10 from human resources employees. Come on. Cool. So you can see my national ID number. I've got a login ID. I've got a job title. So my CEO's data is in this table. If we come back here and we use Invoke Dba Db masking and we pass in that masking JSON that we've created, it's going to go through and actually update the values in the table. So do not run this against production. I mean, that will make your data extra safe because you just overrode it. But the idea of this is that you would take your production data, restore it to your test environment, and then mask that data there, right? That data is going to be overwritten. It's running update statements against the table. And you can see I've again put the verbose switch on, and you can see what it's working on. Cool, and there's only 290 rows in this table, so it doesn't take too long. As I mentioned, Sandra's done a bunch of work on performance tuning this, and without the verbose on too, it will run a little faster. But you can see it's going through and updating national ID number, it's doing the login ID. We've got 2 more columns to go. Come on. All right, birthday, 1 more to go. We can actually come look at this already, that's fine. So if we take a look at our table after it's been masked, what we'll see is totally new data. Oh, so it hasn't got to job title yet. That's the one I wanted to show you. Come on, last one. And all of these scripts are available on my GitHub. I'll share the link with you in a little while. But you can pull these down and test them out. The scripts to build the Docker containers that these run against is also included in there. So it's pretty easy to pull that down and get this up and running in no time. Cool. Let's see if it's done job title now. Nope. Guess I gotta wait for this batch to finish. I think this runs slower once I'm streaming the content to any kind of Teams or GoToMeeting or whatever. Okay, so we got my results back. It took 2 minutes to mask that data, which is a little slower than usual. But if we come back and take a look at our human resources table, you can see that my login ID has been replaced, the national ID numbers have been replaced, and my CEO is now a future usability strategist. I'm just showing you how you can mask 4 columns in one table, but you could easily adapt that JSON to go against your whole database once you've mapped out all of the data that needs to be masked. There is some deterministic masking in there. I haven't played with it. As I mentioned, Sandra is writing a bunch of content around that right now, which will be really interesting when it comes out. All right. So we are going to move on to database migration. So as I mentioned, Dba Tools it found its the beginning of its life migrating SharePoint instances. So this is really where I think the majority of the power of it lies. I have used this for so many database migrations, and it makes things so easy and repeatable. So we're going to take a look at the things we can copy from one instance to another. We'll look at our databases and logins, and then we'll migrate them, and we'll upgrade the databases on our new instance. If you prefer to read about this kind of thing, I have written a blog post on the Dba Tools team. The link is here in the notes. It goes through pretty much the same examples here, but just in a blog post. So get-command, as I've mentioned that already, it's going to list all the commands from the Dba Tools module. And in this case, I've said I just want to see the copy ones. So these are all the things you can copy. Agent jobs, job categories, agent server, credentials, databases, DB mail settings, all of these things can be transferred from one instance to another. Let's go ahead and use get DBA database to take a look at the databases we have on MS SQL 1, which is where we're going to migrate from. I'm using out variable again to store the results in the DBs variable that we'll use in a second. I've excluded system databases. And you can see I've got 2 databases, AdventureWorks and Database Admin, which we've already seen and we understand, right? The code just here is just selecting certain parameters and then formatting it in a table, which you can see here. Let's take a look at the logins we have on our MS SQL 1. We're also going to migrate our application logins, right? Our application is going to need to be able to connect to the new instance. So here you can see Bob, Jane, Jess P logins. These are all the ones we created in the earlier demo. We can also use get DBA process. So presumably our application has been taken down, it's migration day, we're ready to go. We just want to make sure that our database is clear of any connections before we try and move it. You can see here that someone is running as SA, running Azure Data Studio. That's the demo that I had open just a second ago. So that's get DBA process. We can pipe get DBA process and say any processes running against database admin, go ahead and kill them, stop DBA process. So we'll kill my Azure Data Studio session off. If you have a bunch of application connections still connected, it's probably a better idea to go back to the application team and say, hey, can you shut down the application properly so we can get started? But since it's just me, we're going to kill that off. So we're now ready to migrate our databases. So I have my MS SQL 1 instance. Let's go ahead and show you MS SQL 2. Just connect to that guy. There's currently no databases here, okay? So let's migrate from MS SQL 1 to MS SQL 2. The database variable that we collected earlier with the information, I'm just grabbing the name of that. I'm using the backup restore method. Let's kick this off. And I'm using a shared path. That just needs to be something where both instance accounts has access to. And all this is going into copy DBA database. So what this is going to do, it is going to back up my databases from MS SQL 1 to the shared path, and then MS SQL 2 is going to come in and restore those databases one at a time. So you can see that it just did the backup for AdventureWorks, and now it's doing the restore to MS SQL 2. So if we come across here and we refresh this, we can see my AdventureWorks 2017 database has made it to MS SQL 2. Once that's complete, it will do the next one, right? It's now backing up database admin from MS SQL 1, and it'll restore it to MS SQL 2. You can control all kinds of things about this copy DBA database. You can do multiple files. You can set the source offline as soon as it's finished. You can set it read-only. Again, recommend using get-help for all of that. Okay, so you can see that they've both been successful here. Now we need to migrate our logins. Copy DBA login, source, destination. I'm just specifying one login here, but it's going to do basically the same thing, but for the login, it's going to script it out from MS SQL 1 and then run that script on MS SQL 2, granting the same permissions that it had on MS SQL 1 to MS SQL 2. So if those databases exist, it's going to assign the same permissions. Now that I've moved my databases and my logins, I can go ahead and set my source databases offline. So set Dba Db state. This is just going to force them offline. So if there are any connections left from my earlier sessions, kill them, set these databases offline. And you can see that's come back, that the status is now offline for both databases. If we take a quick look again at MS SQL 2, I've got two databases. And if I have a look here, my databases on MS SQL 1 are offline. The application can no longer connect there. They need to repoint to the new database. Once we've migrated, and if we've migrated to a newer instance, as we have in this case, we've migrated from 2017 to 2019, we're going to want to go ahead and check the compatibility. So get Dba Db compatibility. You can see my system databases are all at level 150, which is expected, but my databases I just migrated are at version 140. I created this compat splat, which I passed in to get the compatibility levels. I can also add properties to it. So add the database admin, and add the target compatibility of 15. I do not know why it's 15 and not 150, but it is. I can then run set Dba Db compatibility with that same hash table that now has the extra properties on, and you can see I've upgraded my version to 150. I mentioned this earlier, one of the powers of Dba Tools is this ability to share code and share knowledge. There's a blog post here about upgrading databases. It is to 2014, but the same things still apply. And someone took all of the ideas and the knowledge from this blog post and put them into Invoke Dba Db upgrade. I'm going to run that now, but basically what it's going to do is it's going to update the compatibility level if it's not updated. It is going to run check DB with data purity, which makes sure that any columns, column values are still in range. There used to be an issue with, I'm not even sure which version it was, one of the earlier versions where date times could then be out of range on upgrades, so this checks that out. It's going to do dbcc update usage, it's going to update stats, and then it's going to refresh views. And you can see it comes back and tells you that all of those things were successful. So without knowing too much about upgrading databases, I can run this and I can put myself in a good position. Now, it's obviously not the best idea to just run code blind, but all of these commands link back to where the knowledge came from. So if I run get-help for this, I'll find this blog post and I can go read up on it, see what I want to do, make sure I'm in a good spot. Cool. All right, that is migrating databases. That is one of my favorite things to do with Dba Tools. I have saved so much time using that in the real world. All right, we are going to skip over best practices for now. It is basically just looking at all of the get-command for test functions. I will include that in my GitHub repo, so feel free to explore that. I want to go ahead and take a quick look at documentation. Documentation is not everybody's favorite thing. I'm going to run this while we talk through it. But it is really important, right? And Dba Tools is going to make this so much easier for us. I'm going to show you how you can quickly export all of the things we care about our instances. So I've passed in 2 instances, MS SQL 1 and MS SQL 2. I've given it a path, basically a folder that it is going to start spewing out files to, and you can see them on the left here. And then I'm saying exclude replication settings. I don't have replication set up, and it takes a little while for it to detect that, so I'm just ruling it out. Export Dba Instance. I use this at a previous job to run every morning against every one of my instances into a source-controlled folder, and then had Azure DevOps, a pipeline, run this, and then check for any differences. If there was a difference, it created a PR and let myself and my database administrator friends know. And if we came in the morning and we said, what's this login? Why is this database offline? What's going on? Someone would be like, oh yeah, that came in as a change yesterday. And so they could document that in the PR, submit the change to the repo, and we had an up-to-date information about every one of our instances. So the really nice thing about that is you can quickly see if anything's changed and make sure that it's all documented, right? If something's happened and you didn't know about it, this is going to capture that every morning. So this is really powerful. So as this is going through, you can see what it's exporting. We've got database information. So this is all of the information to restore my databases. Now, Dba Tools is magic, but it's not that magic. You do need to have your database files somewhere safe. In a DR situation, if we lost our SQL instance, we now have the scripts to restore those databases, but we obviously still need those files. We also have all of our DB mail settings, all of our extended event sessions, all of our logins on each instance. Here's our Bob login that we created earlier. Any resource governor instances that we have, and any SP configure options. So this one's really powerful, right? If we've just migrated our databases from MS SQL 1 to MS SQL 2, when this gets done and it moves on to the second instance, which it's doing right now, one of the things we can do in code, if we open both files and I press F1 to get the command palette up, I can say compare active file, and I can compare the SP configure options from MS SQL 1 where we came from to MS SQL 2, and I've actually got it backwards. This is MS SQL 1 and this is MS SQL 2 on the left, but you can see it's highlighted that CLR was enabled on my old server. So if I've migrated and I didn't enable it on my new server, this could cause a problem for my application, right? But I can catch that with this kind of documentation, so it's really powerful. As I mentioned, it's also really great in DR situations. If you need to know what your servers look like, all of this is exported and you have it handy, ready to go. So I highly recommend taking a look at this export Dba instance. You can control all the things you want to export. You could just get certain things if you wanted. It's a really powerful command. All right, so we've got just a few minutes left. We're going to jump back over to the PowerPoint. As I mentioned, all of the demo scripts that we saw today are available on my GitHub. This link is already up to date. The slides are up there. Everything you need is up there. So go check it out. Comment on it if you like it. If you want to see more, just let me know. Some more resources. If you've liked what you've seen today and you want to get more involved with Dba Tools, or you want to read up on it some more, the top link is the MEEP, the early access to the Dba Tools book. The second link is a really great blog post on why Dba Tools is secure and how you can take that to your enterprise and say, these are all the things that Dba Tools do. This is why I should be able to use it in the enterprise. And they've done a really great job on that blog post. I highly recommend it. The middle section here, I've got 2 links to the docs. Docs.dbatools.io is all of the comment-based help on a website. It's really cool. And this build is a build reference of all the SQL Server builds and KBs, CUs, all that information. Finally, just some links at the bottom if you want to get in contact. The Dba Tools GitHub, Slack, or Twitter. Reach out to us. Let us know what you think. And finally, just again, a big shout out to the Data Saturday crew for inviting me, and thank you for giving me this slot to present my session. And thanks to the sponsors for making it possible. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat now or reach out to me after the session. Do we have any current questions? Let me make this bigger. Best practices to schedule, command, and secure login credentials needed to connect to instances. Best practices to schedule. So it depends really on your enterprise, right? If you have an enterprise scheduling tool like Control-M or something like that, you can schedule PowerShell scripts through that. As far as credentials, that one is tricky, right? So you can use the Windows Credentials Store or Credman to store credentials. That's one option. If you do it through like a scheduled task or something like that, you could run it under that account that needs permissions, like a service account or something. If you had something like Azure Key Vault, you can pull credentials out of that, or some kind of secret store at your organization. There's a lot of depends on that question, I'm afraid. But good question. That's definitely something we need to think about as we're writing scripts and scheduling them, right? I would personally probably try and run it under a service, like run it as a service account that has the right permissions.